Hello, and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, and we are back to have another conversation with an innovator in sustainability. Today, we want to talk about the home, and in particular, how a beautiful wood deck or fence can make a home more comfortable and valuable. But traditional wood decks and fences are prone to rot and need replacement, often within 10 or 15 years of their construction. I have a fence in my backyard that needs it after 6 years. Recycled plastic and wood can be combined to make a sustainable, durable alternative that lasts a minimum of 25 years. Our guest today is Leslie-Adkins, and she's the Vice President of Marketing and ESG Development at Trex. ESG, by the way, is Environmental, Social, and Governance. It's a term we've talked about on the show, and if you need to get some information about that, look for the link in the article. Trex is an innovator in wood alternatives, and it was founded in 1996 on the premise that there must be a better use for, and this is a quote, the mountain of single-use plastic film packaging generated every day that is not being recycled, unquote. So the company developed a process for making a wood decking alternative that consists of 95% recycled polyethylene film blended with sawdust made from mostly reclaimed wood. The result is decking that looks like wood, but lasts at least 2.5 times longer. These materials are sold for home and multifamily building use, as well as in commercial buildings. Trex is very interesting for this reason. It is one of the largest buyers of number 2 and number 4 polyethylene film in the United States. It has developed a novel commercial recycling program that pays retailers to collect all of that often hard to recycle film used to wrap palletized packaging and the plastic shopping bags, bubble wrap, and other troublesome things like air pillows that are used in padding in e-commerce boxes. All of that is collected by Trex and used to make the Trex products. So upcycling their waste, the plastic waste, is contributing to a more sustainable built environment. And that's an intriguing solution to all of our current waste problems. We should think more broadly about it. You can learn more about Trex at Trex, Trex.com. Welcome to the show. How are you today, Leslie?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for that intro.
Well, thank you for joining us. I genuinely appreciate you taking time to talk with our audience. I read in your most recent sustainability report and I want to ask a question. Does Trex consider itself to be a recycler as much as an engineering company? How did Trex build a recycling collection network with 18,000 collection points?
Well, I'll answer the first part of that. Yes, we absolutely consider ourselves to be a recycling company as well as an engineering company. Mm-hmm. And as to how we built the network that helped us become one of the largest recyclers of plastic film was with purpose and over time, because Trex has actually been around almost 30 years from the very start, and was always founded on turning recycled waste into something that would be beautiful and lasting and functional for homeowners on decks and so forth.
Well, it's interesting because in my mind, Trex represents a company that really has embraced circularity to the utmost degree. You see all of this material lying around, you found a new use for it. And in particular, you focused on not just recycling, but upcycling the old wood. How did the founding team, I guess is the right way to ask the question,
sure, come
to recognize that there was this huge resource lying around that could be, to use the phrase, mined for a better outcome?
So it's a fascinating story. So if you go back 30 years plus, the original inventor of Trex was a man by the name of Roger Wittenberg, and he was, of all things, he made breadcrumbs. And so to make breadcrumbs, he was using stale bread that would come in from, I'm not sure where he got it, but it comes in and it was in bread bags. So he'd use the bread, and he kept piling up all of these plastic bags. And he was the one who's like, there's got to be a better way. So he innovated and worked and invented a rudimentary method of taking that and turning it into something new. And he was making benches or something. Ultimately, fast forward, Mobil Corporation hired Roger in this invention, and they started turning it into decking. And it was originally called Timbrex back in the day. Mm-hmm. And then some of the leaders who ultimately spun off of Mobile, four gentlemen who spun off and made it the Trex company, and we've been doing decking ever since. So it's really is rooted in that. And so many companies, are rushing to try and find ways to use recycled content, whereas that's how we actually started. So we sort of, green is in our DNA, we'll say.
So Trex really has some impressive recycling and sustainability results. Just in 2020, you diverted 362 million pounds of polyethylene film from landfills.
That's right.
547 million pounds of reclaimed wood. It sounds like the key to your growth is continuing to get access to more recycled materials. Is that looking like an easy journey, or is it going to be hard to keep gathering enough to make more Trex product?
Well, that's an interesting challenge that we face because we are on quite a growth trajectory. And the more we grow, the more recycled content we need. And you couple that with the fact that ESG pressures for other companies around the world have everyone scrambling to try and find recycled content. So we find a lot more competition for the typical recontent that we've been using for decades. But that's where we couple our recycling expertise along with our engineering expertise, and we're trying to find, continue leveraging the pathways that we have for recycled content, but we're always looking for what's the next path. Like, what's the next recycled plastic film that's not being recycled right now that we could help solve a problem for?
So in the worst case scenario, I assume you would fall back to using virgin plastic or wood, but it sounds like you'd consider that a failure. Is that the case?
We would not like that at all. It would be completely counter to who we are and who we've always been. So, as our growth path continues, will the numbers shift slightly? Yes, but more than likely they will until we find the next great pathway of, whether it's agricultural film or municipality film that is collected or manufacturing waste, that sort of thing. But we're out there. Our team is quite adept at finding these channels and building the relationships and making sure we have a growth path.
So you started with the sustainability innovation and you continue to develop these more efficient processes for collecting material and so forth. But your success is certainly built on the consumer satisfaction with the product. How did Trex get people to think about a wood alternative and grow to $881 million in sales in 2020? What's the key to getting people to consider a sustainable alternative? Is it that it's sustainable, or is price, performance, and convenience first and foremost?
Well, if you've ever owned a wooden deck, and I have, and you've had to refinish it, or you've gotten splinters from it, and use the chemicals that are required to, sand and stain it. I remember my husband and I early on had a wood deck, and we did that, and we were like, oh, we never want to do this again. So really, it was meant to solve a problem out there that, maintaining your deck rather than being able to use it. And that's one of the things that Trex absolutely solved in the early days, that you didn't have to sand, stain, or refinish it. Unfortunately, the early generation product didn't solve all the ills. You could get it in any color so long as it was gray. So we've certainly evolved and developed along the aesthetics side as well. The holy grail is make it look like wood, but without any of the pitfalls of wood or the hard labor involved with a wood deck. And also it's much, much more lasting. So I'm proud to say that today our 2021 earnings have been released, so I can share that we are now over $1 billion company. And we have products that have a range of colors that you are also guaranteed to resist fading and staining for 25 years, and that they will perform for 25 years. So it's a really great offering for people who want to have outdoor living environments. And that's a big, huge trend that's continued to grow over time. And having a sustainable option that is both high performance and low maintenance, that's really the sweet spot in which we play.
I was surprised when reading the product lifecycle analysis that you did in 2019 when you compared treated lumber to Trex product. You found that treated lumber produces 73% more CO2 equivalent emissions than the same amount of Trex decking, even though Trex decking requires 43% more fossil fuel to make. How does that work? Can you break down roughly how wood carries a higher carbon footprint than a recycled wood and plastic product?
Yes, I'll try to reduce this to layman's terms because I am not a scientist. But you start first with how long does it last? And so over the same period of time, you would have 2 to 2.5. You'd have to rebuild a wood deck 2 to 2.5 times to equal the longevity you get with Trex. So if you just think about that, the number of materials used, the amount of output, that's a huge portion of it. Secondly, when you dispense with an old wooden deck, and let's say it ends up in a landfill, it does contribute to greenhouse gases. Whereas at the end of Trex's life cycle, if it should end up in a landfill, because the wood is encased in plastic, it's almost inert, so it's not going to contribute to the gases. So there's a number of items at play, but fundamentally it comes down to the fact that we have a much longer period of use.
Okay, great. So you have more time to offset the embodied carbon in the product in the first place.
Exactly.
Okay, interesting. Now, the other area where you've shown a lot of improvement in between 2016 and 19, you reduced GHG emissions by 9.5%, water use from public supplies by 27%, and reduced eutrophication, which is excess waste or excess nutrients in wastewater that can cause algae blooms in lower oxygen level in lakes, by 50%. How have you been able to sustain that kind of environmental progress even as your business is continuing to grow?
Well, it's interesting because you are looking at the 2019 life cycle. Our first life cycle analysis we performed in 2016, and we really used it as a basis for how can we improve? What is our environmental impact, and what are the places to check? So we identified water and wastewater as issues to go after, and fundamentally this is just good business sense, right? Because if we can recycle more of the water that we're using in our process and keep it from becoming wastewater in any way, ultimately, it makes us much more efficient in our operations overall, and ultimately has a cost impact. So everything's aligned towards that. So you start with your recycled materials as the source of what you're going to build your product with, and then you make sure that as we manufacture, we're doing so as efficiently as possible, and always with an environmental impact in mind. So we are very proud of the team, and I'm happy to say that this is really embraced at all levels of Trex, and we get ideas from the shop floor up. So, and we're always listening and looking for ways to improve.
So now I've seen that your cumulative CO2 emissions have actually risen while your carbon intensity, that is the units of carbon produced to make something, has fallen year over year. When do you expect Trex will actually start to reduce its cumulative emissions? And have you set a public emissions goal at this point? When do you want to get to net zero?
So that's one of the challenges we see for the future, of course. We are continuing to grow. We recently completed a $200 million expansion at our Winchester facility, and we also expanded our capacity at our Fernley, Nevada plant. We also announced that we're going to be building a new plant in Little Rock, Arkansas, that's scheduled to open in 2024. So as we're facing down that kind of growth and expansion, our goal is to be as efficient as possible. As soon as we get everything in almost a stable position and we're not in this grow mode, we'll always be able to, sustainable growth, and then be able to attack how do we actually start to reduce our emissions. And even as we built out these new capacity and look at a greenfield plant in Little Rock, we are trying to build from the ground up there in mind with how can we best use the energy? How can we minimize carbon? What are all the ways we can find it? Alternative energy sources. We're looking at solar, working very closely with the Arkansas energy options there to see what do we have that could be greener. And so we're confident that we'll be able to attack it in the future, but we haven't been able to set the public goals yet, and that's certainly something that Trex, along with a lot of other companies, recognize and appreciate the challenges involved with that going forward.
Tell us a little about how you're using water. You recycle about 99% of the water used in your production processes, and we talked about the fact you're not emitting water that is high in nitrogen and polluting groundwater. What do you do with water, and what role does it play in the production of a Trex board?
Water is used in a variety of ways. I can't speak to all the intricacies of the processing, but for cooling the product as well when it comes out, because of course we use some heat to get the plastic and wood to a consistency to form. So we refilter that water over and over and over and over, and you see we've gotten quite good at it. That early LCA report indicated that we weren't doing as good a job, so we were very pleased with the improvements that were made between 2016 and 2019, and of course those are applied on all of our lines going forward.
Now, one of your facilities is in Nevada. Does the mega drought that's taking hold in the West make access to sufficient water a risk factor for Trex?
I would assume it's a risk factor for us as much as it is for anybody else. Because we are able to reuse our processed water so much, we're not huge. We don't consume huge amounts on an annual basis, I should say. So I feel like we're doing the best we can. It is a risk. It was interesting when I was reading your questions before I reached out to our team. I'm like, hey, guys, what is this? And they said, we haven't encountered any issues yet, but it's certainly something we'll be keeping a keen eye towards.
Let me ask a question about your recycling network, which obviously is a source of a lot of Scope 3 emissions. How are you going to optimize the collection of all of those plastic films that we were talking about earlier to continue to drive down the environmental cost of recycling the stuff, which of course has additional environmental benefits, but we need to squeeze all of the efficiency out of our systems as possible. What are you doing to focus on your Scope 3 emissions in particular?
Well, we have regularly been measuring Scopes 1 and 2. Scope 3 is certainly on the horizon and fast approaching. And we're looking at ways where, we get most of our plastic or recycled plastic from post-retail opportunities. So that's a lot of these large distribution centers, where, as you mentioned at the top of the show, the pallet wrap and things like that. So they're concentrated in environments where we can build up a large amount and minimize the number of trucking going back and forth. We're also always exploring, can we use rail? What are the best ways to get materials for us? Both of our plants have rail spurs that we can take advantage of. So we are very aware of that, and it's a huge cost contributor too. So you can, those are aligned in the sense that as we build our business and look for ways to increase efficiency on a financial spreadsheet, it's also working to help us on the recycling side and on the carbon side.
In your role, what is your perspective on how industry in general in the United States in particular is doing in terms of its transition? Are you finding that your peers at other companies who are responsible for sustainability decisions are making the progress they want? What are the issues that they're particularly concerned about these days?
There's so much focus on it right now that if I had to characterize it, I would say that a lot of people are like, where do we start? How do we get started here? And it can be a little daunting and overwhelming, particularly if you're not a company that, was sort of already geared this way. So we talk to a lot of even our distribution partners. We have some fabulous partners like Boise, and Boise Cascade Lumber Company is a distributor of Trex. And we talk with their ESG team, and we're constantly trying to find ways to make everything we do together contribute better. So, for instance, when we do ship bundles of Trex decking, they're wrapped in a bundle cover. Well, Boise ends up with lots of these bundle covers. So we're now talking to each other like, let's bring those back. We've got trucks going back and forth all the time, and we have these conversations going on with other distributors as well. But let's bring that pallet wrap back. Let's either recycle it, or we can churn that up and put it back into our product. And, it's a win-win for both of us. So they're not having to dispose of it in a landfill somewhere, and we get it back and can put it to use again.
So let me ask you a kind of a where to get started question. If you were entering a new sustainability role, what would you focus on in the first 90 days to try to understand the company that you were taking responsibility for sustainability for? Where would you start?
I think I'd start with, what are the raw materials? What is the process? Do we have good data sets? We've been working on ESG. In June, we'll be releasing our 4th annual report. But I'll tell you, that first year, it was just getting everybody together, because you have all these things in a company and they're generally dispersed. Like you've got the the people who are paying the electric bills and the people who are running the machinery and the people who are buying the raw materials. And you got to get a team together that can start to pull it all together. And our first ESG report, looking back, it was pretty rough, but it was the first time we were able to really aggregate all this. So you have to get your internal team together and give them a sense of the why. Don't make it just another task that they have to do, but here's why we're doing this, and here's how it's going to benefit not just us, but the environment and everyone else.
It's interesting. It's going back to what we talked about at the beginning. Trex is born of that, and getting people to begin to think that way is the biggest challenge internally for most companies. Your ethos and your mission defines a sustainable direction to start.
Exactly.
And I don't know whether or not you have. Yeah, I don't know whether you have experience at other companies in trying to get people to think inside the company about sustainability, but what are the messages that you need to send to staff to get them engaged with sustainability, following up on what you just talked about a moment ago?
Sure. It's interesting because you have to think about the why and explain the why. And those audiences are multiple. I mean, you can start with our consumers understand more and more, because I'm in charge of marketing too, and we do focus groups with consumers, homeowners who are actually either building with Trex now or thinking about building a deck, and we're constantly reaching out and finding out what matters to them. And I'm happy to say, particularly with you, that over the 13 years that I've been at Trex, we've seen a real turning point with consumers caring more about the eco-friendliness, or what is the environmental impact of the products they're buying for their homes. And we used to ask the question, let's go back to 2010, used to ask questions, how much does it matter that Trex is 95% recycled content? And they would say, well, that's great, but it's probably not going to drive my decision. We found by 2017, 18, if we wouldn't ask the questions, consumers in the room would say, what's this made of? Is it recycled? Is this environmental friendly? And it was fabulous. It's been a great arc to follow. So you start with, this is what our consumers, the ultimate end users of our product, demand. Then as a public company, investors, just the incentive posed by the investors asking the questions and demanding it of companies is driving a lot of change. And so you start to pull all that together, and then you've got a group of employees, that probably care as well. I mean, at Trex, of course, it's in our DNA. It's been part of who we are all along. So we certainly have attracted that. But I imagine that at most companies, if you ask the people who actually work there, this kind of stuff matters, and it makes you feel better about what you're doing every day.
Yeah, I think that's so important, is just to tie people's perception to what their customers are going to ultimately determine about the value of what they do. And that's something we tend to insulate ourselves from personally, because it's taking a lot of responsibility. But this responsibility is being recognized across the entire economy now. So you have to get on board, or you're going to lose customers.
Exactly. And so we're lots of companies are jumping on this bandwagon. We were fortunate that, the E in ESG has always been a part of us. So, it was much harder for us, honestly, on the social and governance side to really look at the areas where we have to make a lot of improvements and changes going forward.
So let me ask you a couple of practical questions, and these have come in from folks asking questions generally. If somebody's working with a contractor, does that contractor need any special knowledge to use a Trex product?
I would not, definitely not. And in fact, a homeowner can build with it. It works. The workability of Trex decking is very, very similar to wood. You use the same tools. You buy screws that are particularly meant for composite decking. Trex, of course, has fasteners as well. You can have hidden fasteners, that sort of thing. But it's very typical construction. There's not really anything different. You cut it with saws the same way. So it's really lovely in that regard. And frankly, for a DIYer, it's a very easy job to do.
And at the end of the life of the product, and I know that most of it hasn't reached that yet, but when it does, what will somebody be able to do with the boards? Do you have a program to take everything back and reprocess it?
Boy, Mitch, I wish we did. If you think about just the distribution of getting Trex from our plants out through a distribution network to retailers, and then it's dispersed even further into homes, I think the logistics channel of how do we recapture that is the biggest challenge. The reality is that we can absolutely regrind that and use it again. So we're working with a lot of our channel partners, whether it's lumber dealers, contractors, and our distributors to start to find like what is going to be a viable alternative for this. You know, there are scraps. When you build a deck and you cut pieces off, there's scraps. Right. Those scraps have a value. They can be recycled and reused again. But how do we build that collection network in a way that doesn't have like hundreds of trucks that either aren't available and not efficient if they were, driving it back and forth? How do we sort of amass quantities that make sense to come back on trucks that are already bound between our channel partners and us?
I hate to get geeky, but could you use Internet of Things kinds of tracking, contactless tags and so forth, so that somebody could scan their deck and say, you know, my deck's here, I want to recycle it, and because you know what has been scanned, you can assess the volume and determine when and it's efficient to go get it?
I love that idea. I would hope that you could, but here's the thing: will the tags still be on a deck 25 years later?
They could be blended right in.
Perhaps. You know, that's an interesting idea and something we can certainly, I know we have teams focused on what's the right way to do this going forward. It's a daunting challenge. And until we really get a network that we can do, it's, you know, it'll be a pilot program and small steps, but every step matters at this point.
And that's exactly the point. We have to take some steps in order to learn so that we can take more steps.
Right.
What's the best way to find Trex products and learn about them? I
would encourage anyone interested in Trex to visit our website, which you mentioned at the top, trex.com, Trex.com. On there, wealth of material and content to help you, dream about it, and to help make it easier to not just dream, but plan, buy, build, and own. We've got retailers listed where you can buy Trex. We've got contractors listed. We've got online tools that can help you design it, visualize it, or even give you a ballpark cost estimate. So we try to do the best we can do to help consumers and homeowners really learn about it and make the whole journey as easy as possible.
Well, Leslie, thanks for taking some time to talk with us about Trex today. It's been fascinating.
Oh, thank you. I could talk forever, so I appreciate the chance.
Well, please come back and do so. We'd love to keep up on what you're doing. It's a great book.
Thank you, Mitch. I appreciate it. And thanks for what you do.
We've been speaking with Leslie-Adkins. She's the Vice President of Marketing and ESG Development at Trex. You can learn more about Trex at trex.com. That's Trex for those of you who have not been following along the spelling earlier. This is Earth911, Sustainability in Your Ear, and I hope you're going to take a few minutes to think about what we heard about upcycling today. Upcycling all of the material in our society is the path forward. Whether folks recognize it or not today is a very good question, but we need to think about circularity in every aspect of our life. And Trex is unique in a lot of ways because they started from that assumption that we had to upcycle all of the plastic film that was lying in the back of retail stores all over the country. This is a good map for all of us to think about following. This is Earth911 Sustainability in Your Ear. I hope you'll share this with your friends and family. Let's get more ideas out there so we can create less waste. We're going to be back soon with another innovator interview. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.